Tyler was the last one to board the plane that morning. Late, breathless, a half-folded boarding pass clutched in his palm like a secret. The cabin buzzed with that quiet hum of first-class opulence, the rustle of designer coats being tucked into overhead bins, the clink of champagne in thin crystal, and beneath it all the nearly imperceptible tremor of tension, like static in the air before a lightning strike. You, watching this now, may think you're just passing time, that this is just another headline, another fleeting controversy in the endless scroll of chaos. But it's not. You've clicked into something real, something raw, something no one's dared to speak aloud. This isn't a story meant to trend. It's a wound, still bleeding. And once you hear what happened next, you won't unsee it. Not in your sleep, not when you're alone at the gate. Not even when you look up at a plane cutting through the sky and wonder, who was really on board? The flight was chartered. Private, yes, but not ordinary. It belonged to someone whose name was never listed in the press, someone whispered. About only in back corridors of boardrooms and penthouses, the kind of wealth that doesn't just buy planes, it buys silence. But there she was, Samara Langford, seated in 1A. Dark-skinned, powerfully still, dressed in navy and cream like she'd stepped out of a high-fashion board meeting, except with a calmness that made people nervous. Not because she was out of place, but because she owned the place, and no one could tell how. Then the flight attendant came. A woman in her mid-40s with a blonde bob and the kind of tight smile that hides cruelty beneath practiced professionalism. She approached Samara not like she was a guest, but like she was the help who wandered too far forward. What she said isn't clear. No one was recording then. No one ever is when the moment that matters most happens. But what came next, everyone saw. She slapped her open palm, audible across the cabin, a sound so sharp it cut through the low jazz playing from hidden speakers. Passengers froze. A couple from Connecticut gasped. A businessman with earbuds, halfway in, stared wide-eyed like he couldn't compute what he'd just witnessed. Samara didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She simply reached into the pocket of her blazer slowly with a grace that felt rehearsed and handed over a card. Black, unbranded, but somehow final. The flight attendant took it with a trembling hand, her face draining of color like she'd just remembered a nightmare she thought was buried. The woman whispered something, just a few words. No one else heard them, but whatever she said made the attendant back away like she'd touched fire. The door to the cockpit opened without a knock. A man in uniform stepped out, looked at Samara, then at the attendant, and then, without another word, he turned and walked off the plane. That was the last time anyone saw him. The pilot vanished. Not just off the plane, but off the grid. No bank activity, no phone pings, not even a license renewal, gone. Like he was never real to begin with. And if you're wondering why there wasn't a massive investigation, why the media didn't explode with the story, it's because everything that happened after that moment was buried. The passenger manifest was wiped, security footage replaced, and everyone else on that flight? They remember the slap but not the moment after. Their minds fill in gaps that don't make sense, like smoke in a locked room with no fire. Except Tyler. Tyler remembers everything. He didn't mean to. He says he was trying to sleep, that his noise-canceling headphones were glitching from a signal that shouldn't have existed. Something not from the plane. A voice came through. A man's voice, deep and familiar, calling out a name. Eloise. Tyler didn't know any Eloise, not then. But when he opened his eyes, the baby across the aisle, the one in the arms of a silent woman wearing mirrored sunglasses, was looking right at him. And she said it back. Perfectly. Coldly. Eloise. That's when the turbulence started. There's no record of turbulence on the flight log, just clear skies from New York to Aspen. But passengers remember lights flickering, wine glasses cracking, the smell of burning metal. One man claims he saw a shadow pass over the cabin, inside the cabin. Another woman swears her watch spun backwards for 8 full minutes. And Samara? She remained seated the entire time, unbothered. the kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace. It comes from knowing exactly what's about to happen. What's not in the papers, what no one's supposed to talk about, is what Tyler found when he landed. His suitcase missing, his hotel reservation erased, and tucked into his coat pocket, a boarding pass from another flight, a flight that never took off. The date, 3 years ago. The name on it? Eloise Langford. There's more. A message left on his voicemail from a number that doesn't exist anymore. It wasn't a voice he recognized. It was his grandfather's, dead since 1999. Whispering, only one sentence over and over through static. You were never supposed to see her bleed. But what no one's figured out yet, what Tyler still refuses to say out loud, is that Samara bled that day. Just once. A single drop behind her left ear, bright red. The only proof she was ever human. Or something else. And if she wasn't, then the real question is, who or what owns the sky now? Tyler's fingers trembled as he stared at the voicemail again, the phrase looping endlessly, distorted by static yet unmistakable. You were never supposed to see her bleed. It echoed in the hollow corridors of his mind like a pulse he couldn't escape. He pressed play one more time, hoping to catch something, anything, that might tether him to reality. But all he got was broken noise, a whisper caught between worlds, just beyond grasp. The message felt less like a warning and more like a tether pulling him under. And in that instant, a flicker of doubt crawled beneath his skin. Had he ever really been on that flight at all? Or was this some fractured memory stitched together by trauma and paranoia? A mind unraveling under the weight of secrets it was never meant to carry? The question haunted him in the silence that followed. The silence of his small, dimly lit apartment, where the blinds were always half closed, as if keeping something out, or worse, keeping something in. He told himself it was the jet lag, the pressure, the anxiety eating away at his edges. But the truth clawed at him. Pieces of that day didn't line up. Small things, tiny fissures in the story no one else noticed. The flight attendant's face, the blonde woman's face, flickered in his memory. But when he scrolled through every news story, every viral clip, she was always someone else. Someone with different eyes, different scars, different reasons to hate or fear. Why was his mind rewriting faces? Why couldn't he find a single passenger who remembered the pilot disappearing, or the baby whispering Eloise? Were those echoes nothing but the remnants of a fever dream? That night, the paranoia deepened. Tyler was jolted awake by a faint scratching at his bedroom door. His heart slammed. The air thickened as if the walls themselves were listening. He flipped on his phone and scrolled through his recordings. The files from his call recorder, the weird, untagged audio saved automatically. One stood out. A minute of static, crackling with whispers he could barely make out. He played it at different speeds, filtering the noise, and suddenly, a voice cut through. A soft, brittle voice, too faint to be real, yet unmistakably human. They don't want you to remember, it said, repeating over and over like a broken mantra. Then came the knock on the door. When he opened it, there was no one there, only a small envelope taped to the frame. No handwriting, no stamp, no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid, its edges curled and yellowed like an artifact from another time. The picture was grainy, but the subject was clear. A smiling baby in a pale blue dress clutching a stuffed bear. Written faintly in pencil on the back was a name. Eloise Langford. Tyler's breath hitched. How was that possible? The baby. From the flight, the name from the pilot's voice, the voice in his voicemail. It felt like a puzzle box closing tighter, and he was trapped inside it with no key. Then came Lila. She appeared in his life like a ghost summoned from a place he wasn't sure existed. Lila was a friend of a friend, someone who'd worked in intelligence before vanishing into obscurity, or so she claimed. She reached out through a cryptic message, a flicker of light in his growing darkness. We're looking at the wrong angle, Tyler. The truth is buried beneath what they don't. Want you to remember, she spoke in riddles, her voice trembling with urgency. But every word she said seemed to slip away the moment he tried to grasp it, like sand through fingers. They met in a bar that smelled of stale beer and regret, a place where secrets were. Currency and trust was a dangerous gamble. Lila's eyes darted constantly, like she was watching invisible watchers. Her story tangled with his own, yet every detail she gave him was laced with contradictions. She claimed to have evidence, recordings, documents, surveillance footage that exposed the billionaire's twisted empire. But every time Tyler asked to see, she evaded with a smile too sharp to be kind. "You don't want the truth," she warned. "Not yet, it'll unravel you." Tyler wanted to believe her, desperately, but as days bled into nights, the line between ally and adversary blurred. Sometimes when Lila wasn't looking, he caught her speaking softly into her phone, words dripping with dread and something darker, fear, or maybe guilt. And when he tried to follow, she vanished, like smoke slipping through the cracks of his reality. Meanwhile, his own memories fractured further. He found himself waking up in places he didn't recognize, phone calls from numbers he didn't remember dialing, emails sent with attachments he didn't create. His reflection in the mirror sometimes flickered, like an old TV losing signal, and for a moment it wasn't his face looking back. The soundscape of his life distorted too, voices overlapping in conversations, laughter that turned to screams on the edge of hearing, the persistent hum of static just beneath the soundtrack of daily life. One night, alone in his apartment, the power cut out. The darkness was thick, absolute, swallowing sound and light. He reached for his phone, but it slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. The screen blinked weakly in the blackness, then flickered to life. Not with the usual apps, but a single video file. He didn't remember saving it. Hesitating, he pressed play. The footage was grainy, shot from an unknown angle inside a plane cabin. The camera wobbled as if held by a panicked hand. Then the unmistakable slap, echoing louder than it should in the cramped space, followed by Samara's quiet handing over of the card. But something was wrong. The faces were twisted, distorted, as if viewed through a cracked mirror. The pilot didn't just disappear, he dissolved into shadows. The baby didn't whisper, "Eloise," but something else. A name Tyler couldn't quite catch, the sound warped and alien. And in the background, barely visible in the grainy haze, was Lila, standing in the aisle watching him. When the video ended, the screen went black, and the room plunged back into silence. Tyler's breath was ragged, his mind screamed, to make sense, to find the edges of this nightmare and hold them firm. But every answer only raised more questions. Was he losing his grip on reality? Was the flight, the slap, the vanished pilot, all a hallucination conjured by a mind pushed beyond its limits? Or was there truly a shadow war being waged in the skies, a secret power that reshaped memory and erased truth? The clock on the wall ticked loud in the heavy quiet. Tyler's phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number. "They're coming. For you next. Trust no one. Especially her." He looked up, heart pounding. In the reflection of the window, a figure stood behind him. Familiar but impossible to place. He blinked, and the figure was gone. The truth wasn't buried. It was breathing, watching, waiting to pull him under. And now, so was the darkness. Tyler sat motionless, the faint glow of his laptop casting ghostly shadows across the cluttered room. The detritus of his unraveling life strewn like clues he didn't know how to read. For the first time in weeks, the gnawing knot in his chest loosened, the haze in his mind lifting just enough to catch a glimpse of clarity. The pieces, fragile and battered, finally fit together, or so it seemed. The evidence Lila had reluctantly handed over, buried in encrypted files she claimed were too dangerous for daylight, revealed a startling truth. The flight attendant who slapped Samara was no mere employee. Her name was Linda, a woman tied to a clandestine network that had infiltrated the highest echelons of power. Linda's past wasn't just marked by bitterness or cruelty, but by disappearance. She'd vanished years earlier under circumstances that mirrored the pilot's current vanishing act. And now, according to the files, she'd resurfaced, her presence a signal of something far more insidious. The data was overwhelming. Bank transactions, secret communications, surveillance photos, and cryptic annotations in margins that hinted at a conspiracy so vast it swallowed whole the very concept of truth. Tyler could almost believe he was standing on the edge of revelation, that the nightmare was unraveling, that the missing pilot and the slap weren't random acts but threads in a tapestry of control and erasure. The network had a name, one buried in whispers and half-forgotten court cases, an organization that blurred reality, manipulated memory, and rewrote history for those it deemed threats. Tyler felt the weight of that hidden truth settling like cold iron in his gut. He was not crazy. They lied to him. The mystery wasn't his mind, it was theirs, and the proof was in front of him, raw and undeniable. But then came the flash, an image, a sound, a jolt of recognition so visceral it tore through his resolve. Late one night, as he scrolled through the files again, trying to map the connections, a peculiar recording caught his ear. It wasn't in the main folder, but tucked away in a mislabeled archive. The audio was grainy, distorted, filled with static. But beneath the noise, a child's voice trembled, whispering a lullaby. The melody was haunting, familiar in a way that unsettled him deeply. The voice wasn't just any child's. It was his own. But he hadn't heard this lullaby in decades, not since a foggy night from his childhood that he never understood, but had never fully forgotten. He closed his eyes, and the memory crashed over him. His mother, soft-spoken and distant, singing that very lullaby as she held him tight during a night of terror he'd long suppressed. The night the power went out, the screams that followed, the shadowed figure by his bedside that vanished before his eyes. It was the same darkness he'd glimpsed now, the same cold that pressed against his skin when the pilot disappeared, the same silence that swallowed the plane's hum. That night had been erased or rewritten, a glitch in his memory, a scar hidden beneath years of normalcy. But why did it feel like the same force had been watching him then? Waiting? The realization shattered the fragile peace he'd built. This wasn't just about a slap on a plane, or a missing pilot, or a hidden billionaire's power play. This was something older, deeper, something personal and omnipresent that had threaded itself through his life long before he ever stepped foot on that flight. Something that didn't just erase people, but entire moments, entire truths. It wasn't an organization he could fight or expose. It was an atmosphere, a shadow lurking in the edges of perception, in the flicker of a street lamp, the skip of a heartbeat, the subtle slip of time. And it was hungry. Tyler tried to tell Lila. He shared the memory glitch, the lullaby, the childhood terror. But her face tightened, her eyes darkening with something like fear or regret. "Some things aren't meant to be uncovered," she whispered. "This goes beyond what you think. The deeper you dig, the more it will consume you. And it's been watching since before you were born. You don't know the half of it." He wanted to scream, to run, to tear down every wall he'd built around his mind. But the lines between past and present, reality and nightmare, had blurred so completely that he couldn't tell if he was remembering a real moment or a planted illusion. The shadows in his apartment seemed to pulse with secret life, the silence, between phone calls thick with unseen threats. He felt eyes on him, sometimes on the street, sometimes in his dreams, watching, waiting to rewrite his story once more. Then the twist came. He found an old photograph tucked inside a book of forgotten memories, a picture of his mother holding a baby he didn't recognize, his mother's eyes distant, haunted. On the back, written in a shaky hand, was a date. Not his birth date, not even close. It was the date of the flight, the day he thought had been erased from his life, the day he never really left, the day he was never supposed to remember. And, as the weight of that truth sank in, Tyler realized the story he'd been chasing wasn't linear. It wasn't a mystery to solve, but a cycle to survive, a haunting replayed again and again, folding back on itself like a broken record. Every clue he'd uncovered, every memory glitch, every whispered name, Eloise, Linda, Samara, was part of a loop designed to trap him in a version of reality that shifted beneath his feet. He wasn't just a witness to the story anymore. He was part of it, a piece of the puzzle, and maybe the reason it never fully made sense. The room grew colder. His phone buzzed once more. This time, no message, just silence. Somewhere, just beyond hearing, the faintest echo of that lullaby stretching into the dark. You'll want to watch again, because nothing is as it seems. And maybe, just maybe, you've lived this story before, without even knowing. The silence had been broken not by sound but by something far more unsettling. A presence, diffuse and persistent, threading through the edges of Tyler's fractured reality like smoke through a cracked window. He wasn't alone, not by a long shot. There were others, silent watchers who moved through the same shadows, their existence stitched into the fabric of this tangled nightmare with invisible threads. They didn't speak openly, at least not in ways the world recognized, but they communicated. Cryptic messages slipped like whispers through dead channels, graffiti tags in abandoned subway stations, strange symbols etched in fogged windows, obscure posts buried in forgotten forums that only the most attentive could decipher. These were not random. They were markers, calls to those awake, the ones who remembered the fractures in their own minds, the missing hours, the inexplicable déjà vu. You were right all along, these messages seemed to say. They knew. They'd been watching since the beginning, observing the slow unraveling of a story no one else dared to face. At night, Tyler found himself drawn into a shared dreamscape where faces blurred and voices overlapped. Voices that weren't his own, but carried his memories. Memories that weren't fully his either. He'd wake drenched in sweat, clutching fragments of conversations that hinted at a grander scheme, something older than governments, older than time. Dreams of corridors filled with flickering monitors, each displaying scenes from his life, and countless others, played on an endless loop, a live feed of moments that should have been private but were instead broadcast to faceless observers, who cataloged every fear, every hesitation. The dreams always ended the same way, a figure standing just out of focus, watching, waiting, before dissolving into static. The presence was patient, knowing, and impossible to escape. Then there were the symbols, subtle and sinister, that appeared in the most unexpected places. On the spine of an old book Tyler found in a thrift shop, an insignia that matched the Yao faint tattoo on Lila's wrist. Painted onto the side of a rusted dumpster in a neighborhood he didn't recognize, but had somehow dreamed before. In grainy found footage from 20 years ago that surfaced online, videos from what the government never released. Glimpses of these symbols flashed briefly on the walls behind suited men in secret meetings, their meanings lost, but their intent clear. Control, observation, silence. Each symbol was a key to a locked door in the mind, a reminder that the game wasn't just about what was seen, but what was erased, what was never meant to be remembered. From the shadows stepped a third perspective, someone who didn't fit the pattern of the others, someone who claimed to have no stake in the game but whose words sliced through the fog with chilling clarity. She called herself Evelyn, though the name felt borrowed, a mask worn to shield something raw and untouchable beneath. Her messages arrived through anonymous emails, whispered phone calls with distorted voices, and sometimes just text scrawled on scraps of paper slipped beneath Tyler's door. Unlike Lila, whose truths twisted like a labyrinth, Evelyn's was stark, relentless. The entire story was a symptom of a force that reshaped reality itself, bending identity and memory until there was nothing left but the version they allowed you to keep. "You're not broken," she said. "You're exactly where they want you to be." Evelyn's presence was unsettlingly human. She confessed doubts and fears, the raw ache of losing herself to a shifting world. Her warnings weren't just about surviving the conspiracy, but about fighting the erasure of self, the silent theft of the stories that made each person whole. She spoke of watchers who didn't just observe, but curate, editing memories like film reels, removing faces, moments, entire lives with the casual cruelty of a censor. Her words wove dread into every interaction, making Tyler, and through him, the viewer, question the solidity of their own memories. What if the friends you've known, the places you've lived, the moments that shaped you were all carefully scripted illusions? What if the life you remember isn't yours at all? The lines between observer and participant blurred until they ceased to exist. Tyler's reality became a shifting mosaic of doubt and dread. Every glance in the mirror, an act of courage, every interaction laced with suspicion. Lila's erratic behavior now seemed less like evasion, and more like a desperate attempt to shield him from truths too dangerous to face directly. Evelyn's cryptic guidance offered no sanctuary, only the cold promise that awareness came with a price. And the watchers? They were always there, lurking in the peripheral vision of every moment, their presence felt in the flicker of a screen, the crackle of static, the faintest echo of a voice never meant to be heard. The conspiracy wasn't just a story to be uncovered. It was a lived experience, a slow bleed of reality into unreality, an invasion of the self that left no room for certainty, identity, memory, control. They were no longer separate forces but strands of the same suffocating web. Tyler's struggle became a mirror for every viewer's own hidden doubts, the unspoken fear that beneath the surface of ordinary life lay a truth so vast and terrifying it could unravel everything they thought they knew. And then, as if to confirm that nothing was safe, a final message appeared on Tyler's cracked phone screen. No sender, no words, just an image. A distorted video, seconds long, showing a crowd of people standing in a circle, eyes closed, heads bowed. At the center, a single symbol burned into the pavement, glowing faintly under a sickly yellow streetlight. The camera panned upward to reveal a figure standing just beyond the circle, watching, waiting, and then the screen cut to black. The message was clear, and the question hung in the air like a shroud. Who are the watchers, and how long have they been watching you? As the screen faded, the uneasy certainty settled in deep and cold. This was far from over. The truth was out there, buried beneath layers of memory and deception, waiting to be uncovered again and again. But every revelation only deepened the mystery, and every step toward understanding led further into the shadows. And now, with watchers everywhere and nowhere, the only real question left was whether anyone could ever truly be free. You were part of this story all along, and now there's no turning back. Tyler sat alone in the dim light of his cluttered apartment, the weight of every fractured memory pressing down like a storm cloud waiting to break. The truth, whatever it was, had transformed from a puzzle to an abyss, a reflection not just of what had happened, but of what it meant to be alive in a world where reality itself was a fragile construct. The question was no longer who was watching or what was erased, but why the silence had been forced, why the shadows grew long enough to swallow whole lives without a trace. And in that unbearable stillness, Tyler faced something far more profound than conspiracy. The raw, aching core of his own humanity. He had chased answers into the darkest corners of his mind, where pain and fear twisted into something almost sacred. In this moment, vulnerability was not weakness but the only path left to truth. He reached out, voice trembling, to Lila, not as a detective or a fighter, but as a broken soul seeking connection. "Why us?" he asked, his words barely more than a whisper. "Why keep us trapped in this endless loop? What do we mean to them, to whatever this is?" She looked back with eyes that held the weight of untold stories, a confession trembling behind her lips like a fragile thread. "Because," she said finally, voice cracked and raw, "we carry the memories they want gone, but also the hope they can't control. We are the fractures in their perfect design, and for that we are dangerous." The room seemed to contract, the walls closing in with the pressure of that truth. Tyler realized the conspiracy wasn't just external. It was internal, woven into the very essence of identity. The watchers, the symbols, the erased moments. They were manifestations of a universal struggle to define the self when everything else threatens to dissolve. What was being tested was not just memory or control, but the resilience of the human spirit itself. Could it survive the erasure? Could it reclaim what was lost without losing itself in the process? The philosophical weight was staggering. Tyler's own trauma, his forgotten childhood, the lullaby that haunted him, was no accident but a reflection of the larger pattern, pain encoded into the self as both shield and wound. The mystery mirrored every person's deepest fear, that the self is fragile, mutable, and maybe even an illusion. Yet within that fear was a paradoxical light. The very act of questioning, of remembering, was rebellion. It was the scream of existence refusing to be silenced. Then came the choice. Tyler stood at a crossroads carved from truth and uncertainty. To confront the watchers, to dive fully into the abyss of memory and risk losing everything, including his own mind, or to surrender to the carefully constructed illusion, to live safely in the shadows, but forever cut off from his own story. The choice was irreversible. Either path carried its own kind of destruction and salvation. It was the ultimate human paradox, the hunger to know and the terror of what that knowledge might bring. With a shuddering breath, Tyler whispered the painful confession that had been buried beneath layers of doubt. "I'm afraid," he admitted, voice raw with honesty. "Not just of what they did, but of what I might become if I find the truth." Lila's hand found his, steady and grounding. "Fear is the doorway," she said softly. "You're not alone in this. Whatever happens next, it's because you dared to wake up." And just like that, the nightmare shifted. The watchers faded to the edges of perception. The symbols lost their sharp edges. And for a moment, Tyler felt a strange, fragile peace, an awakening rather than an ending. The mystery was no longer a cage but a mirror, reflecting not only the darkness of what was hidden, but the stubborn, unyielding light of what it meant to be human. As the screen faded to black, the final image lingered, a cracked mirror catching the last rays of a dying sun, fragments of reflection catching fire. With possibility, the story was far from over, more a beginning than an end, a haunting invitation to question everything you think you know about memory, identity, and the truths buried deep inside us all. And then, in the final seconds, the words appeared. Slow and deliberate, etched into the darkness like a whispered promise. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.